You have to begin with a will to live, and not to die or to be dead. Seminal life caught in the throat and conducted between thighs of a eunuch for eating, to be a man, to be a woman. Life is a costume grafted to a dead tree that will awaken us the dead among the dead. And what was made of this, or of life? God, what is my snot rags made of, you Monda Branda? Teardrop of lava, lava of teardrop of this so-called lago of life, in which it's pleased God to see the element of life be swiped in passing, as he might swipe some flaming clam or oyster in the fullness of their indignation, of which they have clothed themselves and tried to clothe me, and after having assimilated me, being is a lie, man is a lie, a baller of swine, a swine of balls. Beings have invented life, then grafted it on the dead tree, of which there all there ever was. Life, a lower form of matter, a sub-element. I, a carved fool's tree, who didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't breathe, but with whole snot pieces, jism, diarrhea, brotherhoods insinuated themselves in me, enveloping my least filament, and setting up for themselves in a sub-elemental cesspool life, a perjured devil of life, which they attempted to animate in lieu of my own. And they were ignorant of, and remain ignorant as ever, of its true moment, and true movement, and pulse, and trajectory, the element of the true duration, the swarming up of gutter roaches on the death tree. I shall never cease, beings shall cease in the pain as is brought, enthroned in my whole body, which was no more than perverse extension of this pain of orgasm. It is sharpened between my two thighs, and the subsidiary muscle it is wound up to meet the needs of vile hunger. For hunger, appetite, taste, the need to be nourished stems solely from this vile orgasm muscle, from which being made love, and was therefore split into man, woman, male, female, whereas had there been no sex in beginning, while present body merely as estrangement of little breath applied to bark of terrible tree that has not ceased growing, and soon will have attained its fatal development. Then there will be the terrible explosion, which will make armies of lice far to the distance, for the reason of existence hasn't produced yet or enunciated. Personally, I'm terribly bored with this being alive, and I shall necessarily quit this life. But not only has the very axle tree of life been faked and displaced, but there can be no access for this miasma of the shit drizzle, one whiff of which weighs in the whole human race, people call spleen. Well, they pick their snot out of their noses in a little bag of swat, while swarming up into which they're given the surname liver, not so as to forget the bestial appetites by which they were born. Just a chance little bacteria, by which we're past my time destroying, since they proliferated on one of my sides one day while I was asleep. But the sleeper that I am will not fail to awaken, and I believe this may be very soon. It happens one day, where I was at, and the way I was. I was no longer virgin, nor intact, nor free, nor alone, nor at the beginning itself. And while I was still myself, the impurity of beings had covered me, and fastened itself to the beginning. So I said that in the thought there was no beginning, and that I myself was the beginning in my body. And that as for the impurities that cover me, I will tidy them up with a whisk broom. The thing is, there is no mind to get outside my body to indicate what it is, no thought with regard to the acts of my body. My body actions held within their limits alone, without radiation or substance or the flowering of thought, which is the spot where sin fastened on to ruin me by creating a remorse in me. To do or not to do, or to be or not to be, all matters of posing the problem of life outside the body in a space that is problematical, illusory, imaginary, etc. That which is beautiful will be made beautiful in trees and flowers and grass, but in thought, never. And even in trees and flowers and grass, it is yet to be seen. All of that of the space of imagination and uncreated conception, and uncreated means pure nothing. The mistake is in the fact. The mistake is in the fact that a being is created above and beyond the body, and that it shivers in a pillar of soot and scrapings fashioned to filthy desires entirely, projections of the lemur mind of the dead one, of all the dead, mirrored in the esophageal tongue of the living, the guardrail gutter of the living, the whole problem. It is only at the hour of judgment that the problem at last will be born, and the problem suspended for eternities, but never solved, at last will be posed in its pockets, mere banging shutters, the TNT, the Jedi, that human beings would have never been being, will come down to reach and track him down, but the senility of the dead has reigned over the living. The senility of the dead has reigned over the living and has tempted all of the living by persistent, tenacious animations for the mass of the dead minds assemble in a single body, but which has been kept where? Exactly where the priests of Iran, Afghanistan, Lithuania, and China would and could and did keep it. They therefore being responsible for this unspeakable delay, for the bodies of live men do not behave the same way. But the fact is, there are no live men, the whole earth having passed over to the dead, to this foul pillar, which is to say, I'm a man tyrannized by the lewd priests of Iran, Afghanistan, Lebanon, Lithuania, the Caucasus, etc., etc., who uphold the meaty skeleton of the abominable man, a skeleton whose sirloins of meat that are the buttocks, the tits, the calves, the paunch, the cleavage of the backside, the cheeks, the tongue, the earlobes, the inside flesh of the leg, the vaginal uterine chops of the loins, the articulations of the tongue, gums, etc., etc., and in all of this iron cage, situated in a cage in the earth, where the so-called initiates will cultivate and cook the dermal man to flesh, fibers of wood. Three more. I hate and renounce as a coward every so-called sensate being. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who is only willing to be for being's sake and does not want to live to work. I'd rather work than feel myself alive. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who consents to having been created and does not wish to have created himself, i.e., who agrees with the idea of a God and yet the origin of this being as the origin of his thought. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who agrees not only to have been self-created and who consents to and recognizes the idea of the matrix nature of the world as his only already created body. I do not consent to not having created my body myself, and I hate and renounce as a coward every being who consents to live without first having recreated himself. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who does not recognize that life is given to him only to recreate and reconstitute his entire body and organism. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who does not recognize his authoritarian organism at the origin of his proper personal being and that of his entire body. I hate and renounce as a coward everyone who is unwilling to consecrate his whole life to the control, as well as the reorganization of the buried, unfounded, and uncreated being of his own thought. I hate and renounce as a coward, every being, every coward who is willing or unwilling to live with sensation, notion, idea, and the body being imposed upon him in advance, who is unwilling to consent to live only to recreate himself, only inasmuch as his whole anatomy is the reconstitution of his thought. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who admits to a difference of a notion, of a being, of a substance between the very body of his being and that of his entire mind. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who agrees to any difference whatsoever in perception between the being of his being and that of his entire mind. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who separates what he calls his body from what he calls his consciousness or his thought. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who agrees to advance that merge or a day or an instant beforehand in the mass mind. I hate and renounce as a coward everyone who does not agree that life is only given to him to separate himself from the masses. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who will not consent to go forth 200,000 reincarnations on earth until he finally becomes conscious of having been born. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who does not agree to the consciousness of having been born as a search and a study superior of that which is living in society. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who is unwilling to pass his life in order to create it 200 times over, to create the control of his life over the body of society. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who allows that he can live without having first been invited to. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who consents to over himself the sensations of being without first having controlled and verified them. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who does not agree that being is granted him in order to verify for himself the validity of life as a created being. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who consents to live without giving himself over to the control and exclusive search of the validity of the created breath. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who can believe in himself anything other than a body created to separate its own validity from the life of any other created body. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who can endure to live without first having separated himself in truth and essence from an already created organism, whether individual, unitary, or totalitarian. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who cannot think that the search for his life as a being is a superior study and giving himself over to sensations, principles, notions uncontrollably linked by other personalities. I hate and renounce as a coward every being who is quite willing to live without first having verified the validity, truth, personal application, character, the sensation thus lends. I hate furthermore and renounce any being who is willing to put up with lending himself to totalitarian applications of crab lice. Finally, I hate and renounce as a coward every being who can think that the application of these totalitarian scratching sensations is superior to verification and control of his own search for life in defiance of those unleashed tornadoes of crab lice. To conclude, I hate and renounce myself as a coward if I did not think that the joy of these totalitarian kicks is superior for me than the act of tearing myself loose from their uncontrollable rotations. I shall be chaste and pure, virgin intact, untouchable. I shall touch no being, eye nor toe. I hate and renounce all mind in God. I shall be chaste for eternity. I shall be a virgin for eternity. I hate and renounce all mind in God. I have the strength because I have the strength, but I hate and renounce as a coward any being that doesn't want to earn it.